Whether it's a good villain, a rival, or simply someone just acting in opposition to a hero, good stories often have counterpoints to their protagonists. Because stories are most often at their best when the main characters are being challenged, which is literally the definition of an antagonist. Compelling foils for the main cast sometimes don't just make a piece of media better, they can and have been the reason some stories are successful. But who could challenge a hero that saved the world? A remarkably powerful mage who's lived over 1,000 years. A character so strong that the stakes in the story are often undermined by her capability. Frieren, the namesake and one of the protagonists from Frieren Beyond Journey's End, is not a normal hero in a story that's far from regular. Because when it comes to a counterpoint for our main character, this show does something it's done time and time again. Subvert trope and expectation by making Frieren the foil of someone else's story. Welcome to a running series called Exploring Frieren. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about the importance of a good counterpoint. Frieren is a show that both embraces and then subverts trope constantly. And last week I started a multi-week deep dive on Frieren's tournament arc. Stories are often built around a protagonist, so any writing decision, especially an entire arc, has to factor that in. How does this impact the main character or teach us something new about them? Now, I believe Frieren has two main characters, and I think the tournament arc also really solidifies Frieren's position as a second protagonist in the story, and I will be going into more detail with that in another video, but that doesn't mean there aren't interesting ways in which the story explores Frieren in this arc. And I think at the forefront of that is the introduction of another everlasting elf, Ziria, the person who taught Frieren. In rewatching this show, I noticed just how many parallels there were between the two elves, like flip sides of the same coin. Now this is where things get interesting, because in our story, Frieren is one of the protagonists, and the definition of an antagonist is someone who works in opposition of that, a foil. A character that takes advantage of the hero's weaknesses and highlights them, challenging them to grow and change, acting as a roadblock to prevent the hero from just getting everything they want in the story. But if we look at who's playing what role more, I think Frieren is much more of a foil to Ziria than the opposite. And I think that's really cool. But to understand that better, let's look at two groups of three. There are three elves we're introduced to in the first season of Frieren Beyond Journey's End. The namesake of the show, Frieren, obviously, Kraft the Monk, and Ziria. Yeah, apparently that's how you pronounce Zeri. And yes, I did not know that until I listened to the dub. Now, a central theme of this story is exploring components of the human condition through the lens of an everlasting elf. Frieren recontextualizing her old journey with the hero's party against a new one. The story is one of character versus self, Frieren's internal conflict being the primary force driving the story, trying to understand the regret she faces in not proper utilizing the time she had previously. A big part of being a person is finding purpose in life. This story explores tons of components of the human condition in really cool ways. And this struggle is really exaggerated in a beautiful way in the long lives that elves face. Kraft the Monk and Ziria having their own struggles in finding purpose in life. What would it really be like to live forever, especially in a world that wasn't built for you? How would you find purpose and prevent yourself from just disconnecting from everything? Well, another theme in this story is using magic to find that purpose, but we'll get to that in a second. Because the second group of three that Frieren and Ziria are part of is three great mages, all taught in a descending line. Frieren's master, Flamma, is the grandmother of human magic, the person who 1,000 years ago convinced humanity to adopt it, not just as a thing for demons and elves. All because Ziria, on a whim, decided to take her on as a student. There's this really important flashback we see during the mage exam where Frieren and Ziria meet for the first time, introduced by Flamma. Where Flamma and Ziria both have an intense flame of ambition deep inside them, Frieren is a mage of peace. It actually leads to this fantastic moment where Flamma predicts that neither she nor Ziria would ever be the mages that defeat the Demon King, as they can't imagine themselves existing in a world of peace. In this world, magic is limited by imagination. If you can't imagine yourself doing something, you can't conjure it into existence. There's a lot of criticism to the addition of this rule in Frieren's magic system, and there's a whole video that should be made on that topic. But the shorthand is ultimately, while it does create complications, it's incredibly important for exploring a fundamental central theme of the story. Flamma and Ziria were both shaped by the chaotic world that they were raised in, finding purpose and comfort in their place in that world. This scene is so important when placing Frieren and Zarya side by side and comparing them, because in a lot of ways, Frieren and Zarya are both flip sides of the same coin. Elf mages that find purpose in life through the pursuit of magic both make a habit of trying to learn every spell that's ever been created, but Zarya is constantly chasing power and control, trying to craft a perfect student. But that need for control often gets in the way of her getting the results she's aiming for. Whereas Frieren's more passive approach to the world is actually the same thing that allows her to be the person to take on the Demon King. Zarya's ambition prevents her achievement, and in that sense, Frieren is her foil. A mage Zarya saw no promise in that somehow achieved something that she was never able to. Because purpose is always moving. If it were something you could catch and harness, the act of attaining it would make it disappear. So while these two characters find purpose in their life through magic, they do it in very different ways. When people are only driven towards goals, there's this inevitable emptiness that comes with achieving them. A clear example of this is professional athletes, specifically Olympians. Some dedicate every part of themselves towards a singular goal, and whether they achieve it or not, ultimately there's this huge void that follows the attempt. And I think the people who find the most value in what they do often find joy in the process. Zarya is a mage driven by ambition towards goals. Frieren is literally quoted saying the pursuit of magic is enough. And the audience knows that, having seen it throughout the entire season. Frieren and Zarya are both characters that completely lack urgency, which is literally demonstrated in this fantastic scene where Zarya and Frieren go for a walk after Frieren delivers Flamma's will. After an argument where they realize they'll never see eye to eye, Zarya says,
"Look at the two of us. We have all the time in the world."
There are multiple fantastic quotes from this conversation that I felt were worth bringing up. Zarya's frustration with Frieren seems rooted in two places. First, their similarities.
"We hardly have lifespans. They're more like eternities."
And second, more importantly, that despite those similarities, there's distinct differences.
I found that repulsive.
That excites me. Zarya?
The fact that Frieren doesn't adhere to Zarya's system, in Zarya's eyes, deems her worthless. Which is funny because initially she sees promise in Frieren.
Must be strong. I like her.
But when Frieren doesn't play along and immediately demonstrate that same ambitious drive, Zarya discards her.
My initial appraisal was wrong. There is no fire within her.
But the counterpoint lies in the desperation. Zarya's need for control will never be met, and Frieren's approach to her life is living proof of that. A powerful mage capable of such achievement outside of her control. The importance of a good dynamic between a protagonist and antagonist is the way both characters are enhanced. Frieren's antagonistic relationship with Zarya is very interesting. I think it adds a lot to the character, because this story starts with Frieren realizing her weaknesses and shortcomings, and her willingness to change further demonstrates the fact that Frieren has so much agency within her life because she doesn't need control. There's this metaphor I use a lot when exploring adulthood, where life is a lot like going down a snowy hill on a sled. And when you're a kid, the hill isn't too steep to prevent you from ever just digging your heels in and stopping when things feel out of control. But as you get older, you realize that the world is so much less structured than you assumed. And in chasing to control a situation, by digging your heels in, you lose agency. You end up wiping out time and time again, and that fear grows. But life isn't about control, it's about influence. Learn to steer. You don't get to change what you're given. One of the most important skills anyone can develop is learning to get the most out of what's in front of you. I think this is a deep, interesting part of the human experience, and I think that this specific dynamic demonstrates the value of that, all while teaching us more about the world and elves and magic, staged during a fascinating mage exam, where a barrier that someone assumes is impossible to break is broken, or the impossibly powerful hero of our story loses. But that's for another video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.